Hey guys, you're back with Juzzy, and it's Saturday, so that means that it's time to get on with some more modifications to my Honda Rebel 500 2022 Special Edition. Today we're going to have a look at the removal of the factory shocks and replacing them with some genuine Diablo aftermarket shocks. Now, the reason why I'm looking at doing that is not necessarily because I'm unhappy with the factory ride. When I ride my bike, it feels comfortable enough. The only sort of change I've made is I've changed the dampener setting so that instead of being on setting 1, 2, 3, I've moved it from 2 to 3. And that just made for a little bit more of a firmer ride, but I'm wanting to change the actual visual appearance of the bike. So I'm wanting to actually make the bike sit a little bit lower. So very similar to what you would do on a car, just for visual appearance reasons. And I'm looking to report back after I do some riding in a later video. Probably what I'll do is I'll use my GoPro or 360, Insta360 footage, just to give you a feel and just listen to what my feedback is during those videos. So this video is just going to be about how to remove the factory shocks and to install these ones. Now, when you measure the factory shock from the very top to the very bottom, so underneath this bolt for the shock, underneath here, the total length is 32 centimeters. Sometimes when you look at different stores online, they will measure the total height of the shock exactly that way, so from the very top to the very bottom. But some of them will measure it from the eye, meaning the very center of the hole. The reason for that is because for some manufacturers, or for some bikes I should say, they might use a cylinder insert, which is used to sort of gap the spacing that's around the bolt. Not all bikes or bike manufacturers use the same hole spacing for the shock. So yeah, this factory one is measured at 32 centimeters, and I was having a look at what the different options are. Now you can go and get an expensive set of Ohlins shocks, and if you have a look at the Rebel 1100, they have a separate reservoir that sort of piggybacks here. It sits like a cylinder in this area here, and that is to look at extra reservoir capacity, so for the oil that is going inside the actual piston of the shock. So you can look at fiddling around with different oil weights. B, you can look at putting different springs in. Or C, you can have a look at aftermarket shocks, and then there's shocks like Ohlins ones that have a separate reservoir for holding that oil. Now, Diablo, e.g. via K-Speed, sell two different types of shocks for the Rebel 500. One is a 30 centimeter shock, so 30 centimeters from the very top to the very bottom, and then there is one which is 28, or e.g. 27.9. So I'm just going to call it 32, and then there's another one which is slightly shorter at 30. Now, I am 170 centimeters tall, and I weigh, with clothes on, probably about 75 kilograms. So I'm a pretty average sized guy, not skinny and not overweight or heavy. And when I was wanting to lower the bike, I thought, okay, well, it's not like the adjustable coilovers with separate ride height adjustment, as opposed to just having dampener adjustments only. So I didn't want to look at buying a adjustable ride height shock, because A, it would have been expensive, and B, this bike is purely just a commuter for me to get to and from work, and maybe once a month I'll go for a ride, probably no longer than 1 to 2 hours, and that's just going out to wherever I want to go and then coming home. So a big factor for me was the price, and these shocks from K-Speed are not expensive at all. So I'll put the link to the description and the actual listing on the K-Speed site down below in the description of this video. But you can see here that the Diablo shock has the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 step adjustments for the dampener settings, and yeah, much the same as the factory shock. It's just that it has a shorter complete overall height. So when I put that roughly about there, yeah, you'll see that the overall height compared to factory shock looks pretty similar, but it is slightly different. But the main thing you'll see here is that the height of the spring, now the spring does go kind of up into the top casing of this one, and but you'll see though that it does have quite a difference in appearance for the actual springs themselves. So you can see here that these springs are progressive rate springs, meaning that when you look at the spring itself, it's not a consistent gapped spring from top to bottom. This means that for factory purposes, or to suit the mass market, manufacturers make springs like this. But when you go into more expensive, more quality stuff than factory, and even more quality than this one here, the spring will generally have a more universal spring rate, or should I say spring spacing, and then it will rely on different elements, including giving you the ability to change your shock oil. It'll have different sized pistons inside the valve for the shock, and yeah, you'll have more dampener adjustments, so it might be anywhere up to say 30 odd increment steps for dampener. Yeah, and then you've also got, as I was saying before, you can have a piggyback reservoir system. So all these things of course cost money, and for most people who are buying a Rebel 500, that's not going to be right at the paramount end of simply wanting to just lower the bike a bit. Alright, so what I'm going to look at now is just the factory ride height. Now I did not measure the height between the tyre and the fender. So all I can do in this space, or in this case, is just tell you that in my situation, I'm just going to do a measurement from in line of the back of the rear fender, and just tell you that given that the ruler's got probably about half a centimetre of play between 0 and the end, it's coming up at around about 6.5 centimetres. I don't know if that's focusing properly, but yeah, it's probably about 6.5 centimetres from this part of the tyre right flush in line of the end of the fender to there. Now I can't take this video when I'm sitting on the bike, but I did have my son have a look, and when I had sat on the bike, the gap from the fender to the tyre brought it down to around about there. So just as a rough guess, that brought it down to somewhere around 3.5 centimeters or so. So going from 6.5 down to 3.5 for a fellow that weighs 75 kilograms. So my way of thinking was that because this Diablo shock is 2 centimeters shorter than the factory one, I figured that because I had around about 2 fingers worth of height there, that by going only for the 30 centimeter version and not the 28 centimeter version, then it should allow me some comfortable or peace of mind that my tyre is not going to be starting to rub on this plastic fender. So let's have a look at the measurements once I've got it all installed. But the first thing I'm going to do is, in my case, I need to remove the top Allen key bolt, which is a 5mm, and the bottom as well. Now on my setup, I've of course got the extension arm for the license plate, I've also got a bracket here, and I've got a cable feeding down to light up this white light on the license plate. So I have to be careful. I need to undo this bolt and just sort of set this bracket aside. You won't need to do that if you're just got a factory bike and you're wanting to change the rear shocks and just make it look a bit lower so it looks a bit cooler. But yeah, I'm just using a impact wrench again with a M5. I've slightly undone the top one, and then I'm going to undo this bottom here with a spanner. And yeah, the reason why I'm not using a bike stand with this install is because once I go to remove the shock from the bike stand actually sits on the swing arm. So basically, if there's no shock here, then the bike's going to want to swing, or at least bring the height down, and I don't want it to be sort of uncontrolled. So I'm just going to leave the bike sitting here, undo one shock on this side as this is the easiest side, and I'm going to see how hard it is just to put this shock in. Hopefully it's not too hard. So I'll get to the point where I've undone the bolts, and I'll just show you how hard it is to pull the factory Rebel 500 shock off. Alright guys, so literally 20 seconds later, I've undone this bolt, removed my little bracket that I've got here for the mini bullet indicator, set it aside, and I've undone the bolt as well. I just wanted to show you how much tension that's under, and it's actually not a lot. It is of course a bit harder with one hand, but yeah, it does slide out relatively easy. So okay, there you go. So the bike dropped about, well, maybe 2 centimeters there, and yeah, I'm gonna have to use 2 hands to get this top shock off. I know I'm not. There you go. So first time I've ever taken, and should be the last that I've ever taken, the factory shock off. And as you can see, here are the differences. So side by side at the bottom, I've got it, yeah, roughly at the same height. Now it looks pretty much the same to me, actually, just a slight bit bigger, but yeah, certainly can't compress that in any way with my hand, because I'm not strong enough to do that. But I'm just going to go ahead and slide that on now. And also just looking, let's have a look if there's some oil on here from factory. No, there's no oil whatsoever, but it is very lightly oiled down the bottom here. Yeah, so I might just put a little tiny bit of grease there, just inside that shaft. That is a pushed in fitting. Yep, same on the bottom as well. So looks like that's got no opportunity to move. But basically, yep, confirmed it is definitely the right size. And so now, because the bike has come down a bit, I will need to stop recording and to use one hand to lift the back seat sort of area and slot this back on. But yes, I will just put a little bit of grease in there, because as you can imagine, the tiniest little bit of movement, I just want to make sure it's got some lubrication rather than none. Alright, so let's resume once I've done that. Alright guys, so because this shock is shorter in length than the factory shock, as you saw before when I removed the factory one, the bike dropped down a bit. And so in order to try and do this, I had to use a conventional car jack to raise right at the bottom of the frame there. So basically you're looking to enlarge the gap between the swing arm and this frame so that you can get enough space to fit the shock in. It was definitely a two-person job. So with a little bit of tension lifting up this bottom of the jack, I was then able to, one person was able to feed the shock through the eyelet holes, but I had to put my right foot here on the swing arm and then lift up, tearing away with my hand on this side, and then I just gently used a mallet to just tap it into position. And so as you can see now, we've actually got it to the point where it's actually in. So I'm going to reinstall the parts I've just taken off and then work to the other side. Okay, so now that I've tightened everything up on the left side of the bike, on the right side of the bike now I need to gain access to this bottom bolt. Depending on what sort of muffler you've got, you may need to remove the 2 bolts here that hold the bracket in for your muffler, so that you can then undo these 2 and do the exact same thing on this side. Alright guys, so now that I've put the shock on this right side of the bike, and I must say it was actually a lot easier because the left shock was in, and so it sort of kept the bike at the correct height. Whereas previously with the OEM shocks, what happened was the bike was sitting a lot taller. And so, therefore, under the weight, it just didn't seem to have the right sort of, load on the bike to keep it in the right position. So yeah, I ended up putting this other shock in, and yeah, the bike feels a lot stiffer. So under the description for this item, it does say that you can easily have a passenger on the back and not have any issues, I guess, with bottoming out. But yeah, I don't know what's quite happened here, but the shock is a 30 centimeter shock, and on the 2022 model, the shock is 32 centimeters. And I figured that by having a shorter height, that the bike would have been a lower ride height. But yeah, I'm not sure why, but as you can see, I've gone and put the ruler in and then, sorry, got it the wrong way, and then gone to have a look. I know my ruler's scratched to all hell, but it's actually at the same ride height, so 6.7. So I'm not really sure what's going on. It has been raining all week, and the whole Brisbane area in Australia is actually forecast for flash flooding in the next 24 hours. So it's really wet outside, and I can't take it for a ride and just sort of let it settle in, so to speak, as people say when they put new suspension in their bikes. So yeah, I've reached out to K-Speed because I'm not really sure if this is just meant to be a shorter shock with a heavy spring load to sort of cater for guys which might be, let's say for argument's sake, 80, 90, 100 plus kilograms. There is a other listing for a 28 centimeter shock on the K-Speed site, which is actually has a photo of the ride height after you install it. So this shock that I bought didn't have such a photo, and so I'm just hoping that it's not a situation where yeah, I'd much rather just go back to the standard shock and try and sell this to someone who's a lot bigger than I am, which this would be more suitable for. Yeah, so it was actually a bit hard to put the first shock on. The second shock was very easy. I needed used a rubber mallet to sort of tap the top and bottom in because it was slightly hard to line it up perfectly. Yeah, so again, it was easier with 2 people. I did end up putting the brace back with the exhaust, as you can see. And on this Diablo shock, you'll see here that I've got it in the very first position. So as you go around here to step 5, step 5 would basically bring the preload of the spring right up. So yeah, that wouldn't help. This is not a ride height adjuster. This is a spring preload adjuster. Yeah, so I've just got it as soft as it could possibly go. What I can confirm is that the spanner that they have provided works really well. It is super stiff to turn, so I actually ended up having to put my trusty metal pole over the end of the spanner just to give it some leverage and enable it to turn. But yeah, this is what the shock looks like. I believe it's the RB0100, and it is definitely marketed as a 30 centimeter shock. So I might let you guys know just how this sort of pans out for me, but ideally this is not what I was really wanting. So Maybe I might be able to do a deal where I return it and we get a shorter shock, which is what I would really want to have. I'm not quite sure, but I'll keep you guys updated. The guys at K-Speed have been really good to deal with, and I've been very happy with their quality. So it just appears though in this case that the listing for the item just didn't seem to have enough information, and it's on me as well, I guess, if I wasn't 100% sure to reach out to the guys, but I'm sure we'll get it sorted out, and I'll post a video update once I figure out how I can get the back of this bike a bit lower. Thanks for watching, guys. I know this is not the result that everyone wanted, but at least it helps people out. And if you are looking to lower your bike, then you know that this particular shock is not the one to get. I'm not quite sure if it's a 2022 model variation that it hasn't been accounted for, but I'll let you guys know. Thanks, guys, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.